I think we're finding less and less credibility in this certification, um,
Yes.
because there's this like, okay, you like, so let's say in my field, right? There's a bunch of people who like went into debt to get a Master's of Divinity. That's like the
Right.
MDiv is like the gold standard for like pastors and preachers and leaders. But then like you could have an MDiv and not lead a thriving church, not
Mm.
understand how to evangelize, not know how to do marriage counseling, or like not know how to talk about finances in a way that actually like prompts generosity in the church. So you could do all this and then still like not do, and I mean successful. I'm making sure that we draw a line between faithful and successful. So
Correct.
I want to be both. I want to be both faithful with what God's given me, and I want some metrics that show that I am successful, that I am fruitful. Okay? I think sometimes we try to create a false dichotomy. Well, you can either be faithful or fruitful. And actually, I think in an ideal world, you can be both. Now, we don't always have ideal worlds. I think that the institution of the seminary somewhere along the way forgot that their primary client was the senior pastor. So not only are they not preparing that person for the ministry well, but then they are not giving any ongoing training to help that person flourish, right? Chuck E. Cheese has to realize that the real client is not my 2-year-old, that the real client is me. My 2-year-old can't pay for Chuck E. Cheese, right? So I'm actually the person they need to win over, which is why I don't know if you've seen all these viral videos at Chuck E. Cheese where like, they got beer at Chuck E. Cheese now and parents get drunk and they start fighting. It's actually very, very funny. If you type in like drunk people at Chuck E. Cheese on like Twitter, you can have a blast for like 10
So
straight
good.
minutes. But I think what we're saying is that, hey, okay, there's a vicious cycle. Pastors are becoming successful without the certification,
Woo.
and the certification is becoming less and less relevant. However, at some point, you reach a breaking point, and now we have pastors going viral for saying things on stage that are theologically inaccurate. So now the pendulum swings back to, do any of these people have degrees? Like, who certified these individuals? Like, so because the institution failed to train pastors, pastors realized if I'm anointed and if I'm gifted, and if I join with a phenomenal organization like ARC, like I could get relevant training to actually help me to grow my church, but at what cost? And that cost has become, we're really, we're executives and leaders and marketers and fundraisers and building builders, but have neglected, like, dang, I think we forgot we also have to be like theologians and like we have to be biblically literate, like as pastors, as leaders. And I think we're gonna go, okay, who's now gonna be, where is the place where we can get certification that's gonna do all of the things? So I think it's a constant kind of like,
No,
man,
this is disruptive thinking, man. This is really disruptive thinking. And I want
I
to get
think
to,
art has done the same thing with denominations. People
100%.
used to find trust in a denomination. If it's Methodist or if it's Baptist or if it's whatever, I kind of know that, okay, the pastor could go off the rails, but I believe in this Methodist institution. The pastor could lose his mind, but I believe in being Baptist. The
Right.
Southern Baptist Convention, for the very first time in 100 years, had the biggest decline in membership last year. And
True.
so I think we're going, okay, we're seeing a shift from trust in organizations to trust in individuals. And what's going to end up happening? Well, we're one Carl Lentz away from what? The pendulum going back to, we need to trust in organizations again because we've trusted in people. And I think what we need to find is that there's actually a healthy, God-ordained balance between
Both and.
institutions and people. That actually it's not either or, but institutions and people have to figure out a way where your personal brand and the brand of the institution can both elicit trust within people and provide that level of certification. Okay,
Yeah.
that's kind of like
No, no,
what
no.
I think.
I like how you put it. You know, it's a balance between faithful and fruitful, right? I mean, story time, really quick. I'm based in the Silicon Valley, and when I started my career at Google, one thing in my head, just because I grew up with Gen X parents, and this was just kind of my mindset, is that at one point I need to get an MBA because I want to be prolific in business, so I
Yep.
need to get an MBA. And I remember sharing my ambition to get an MBA with my manager at Google, and he laughed at me. Like this dude laughed at me. He's like, if you get an MBA and come back to Google, you're gonna be the laughing stock in the office. Because they thought it was like a joke. They're all
Yeah.
building world-changing technology and none of them have MBAs. They're just straight up builders,
Yeah.
right? And that's a similar thing where in the church space, it seems like pendulum is swung to, hey, no, we're just straight up builders. But then, a decade later, I'm starting to see some issues with some of these founders of like these titan organizations, big tech now, that didn't have maybe a values-based or moral framework, and now it's getting them into trouble, right?
Yeah.
And so, in a similar way, in a very specific business vein, I'm starting to see the pendulum swing towards wanting to see managers that have like governance principles that know how to contextually integrate these new innovative breakthroughs into society in a morally responsible way,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the whole conversation around AI right now is you have people super bullish on it, and then you got other big technologists like Elon that's trying to pump the brakes because he's like, hey, have we thought about user safety?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and in the same way, I kind of hear that thread with you is like, okay, hold up. We're in this moment of time. Cool. The church is alive. The church is well. We're building buildings. We're gaining followers on social media. We're making a dent in society. We're culturally relevant. All those things. But hey, is anybody thinking about user safety?
Yeah. And I am.
Okay, so that's what I want to get to. You're not just critiquing this, you're contributing towards
Yeah.
it with Arma, what you're doing with Arma. Can you talk a little bit about that and your perspective, your approach?
Yeah, so 2020, I realized, man, this vicious cycle between seminary and church is like, this is a broken system, and somebody has to model that they can go to school even though they don't need it. So I decided to jump into a doctoral program. And that doctoral program has not, like somebody one time on a Zoom call said, what doors is your doctoral program opening for you? And I said, well, I didn't jump into the program for it to open doors for me. That's a terrible way to think about a discipline. I jumped into a doctoral program to show Pentecostals that you can do this. Stop saying that you can't, or that you don't have time, or that you're too busy. Stop making excuses. When the Holy Spirit asked me to jump into a doctoral program, first I had to get my master's degree because I hadn't got a master's degree. And so that was 2 years of my life. And then I jumped into a 4-year doctoral program, and the Holy Spirit said, this is your act of worship to me. I want you to sacrifice something and go to school, because there are young people coming up behind you that think that school's irrelevant. And the problem is that you actually need the discipline of a professor reading over your sermon and saying, yeah, I think you're a little right on this. I think you're a little left on this. Here's the center line. I gained professors along the way that have become allies for me, that watch me preach and will hold me accountable. I think right now we're in a church space where there's a lack of like real accountability. Okay, you have a board, but that board is less like a group of your friends. And like, who can really say, hey, like the random person on YouTube isn't the person to hold you accountable. I hate these people who like review people's sermons on YouTube. I'm like, get a life. The person, because there can't be accountability without relationship. So there's gotta be somebody in your life who's just like Paul saying to Timothy, watch your life and doctrine closely. Because if you excel in them, you'll save both yourself and your hearers. I think there's gotta be someone saying, are you watching your life and are you watching your doctrine?